I'm with one of Utah's most famous authors and treasure hunters, Dan Lowe. And Dan has come out with an interesting theory and put it into a book, but I want to hit you more up about this because this is something that is close to me, something that I have researched for a lot of years, and it has to do with the mystery glyphs, and Dan's tied it in with Jesse James. And with that, Dan, take it away.
First, I am not a treasure hunter, and I'm certainly not famous. With that, this book is finally finished. It is available now on Amazon, or you can buy it directly from me, whatever. And I finally got this book for those of you who know what it is and the story behind it. It's now available in full color. And then, of course, there's the other two books, but we don't need to go into that. So exactly, what is it you want to know? You want to know the theory?
So you was telling me a theory of how this could be tied into, the mystery glyphs could be tied into the Knights of the Golden Circle, KGC, and which that's interesting to me because years ago, Hillbilly Bob Brewer emailed me when I had a website up back in the early 90s. He emailed to me and told me if I knew it was good for me, I'd take these mystery glyph symbols off the internet because they was KGC, and now you're coming up with the same thing. And so that intrigues me because the mystery glyphs has to be some kind of a story like that. It might not be that, but it could. So I want to hear your theories, how it ties into Jesse James and all that.
Well, 20 years ago when I met with Bob Brewer, I think I would have died laughing if he'd have said that. And you know, I don't remember exactly what it was where the switch finally got flipped, but I think I was doing the assessment on the Black Book. Jesse James was one of his names. I just don't remember exactly what it was that brought it up, but when it hit me, it was like a light switch turning on. Because everything we've been able to figure out about these mystery glyphs over the years, you know, ever since you and I first met 30 some odd years ago.
And that is the reason we met, was because of the mystery glyphs, yeah?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
But, you know, at first we thought they could very well be ancient, and you remember all the stories, you know, Moroni's signature and all that, but there's just something about them that just didn't fit that. And then, of course, you photographed some down in New Mexico that had what appears to be a rendition of a man with a hat and what clearly from the glyph looks like a gun.
Yep.
And, you know, yeah, it could have been something other than a gun, but
looks like
9 times out of 10, it is what it is. And so that kind of left me over the years wondering who could have possibly have done these glyphs that are clearly Sioux Ojibwa hieroglyphs, but who would have done them and for what purpose? Because they had to have been done sometime in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And you know, just nothing was making sense until I was going through the book, the Black Book, doing an assessment.
So let me stop you and just bring these guys up to speed that they don't know what the mystery glyphs are. The mystery glyphs is a unique set of hieroglyph carved into cliff walls, boulders, neatly chiseled in. I mean, painstakingly, neatly carved in. There, to date, I've tracked that there's 30 sites of these scattered throughout the western United States. They're not on the beaten path. They're in remote locations sometimes, but not always. There's some kind of a unique feature by where these are at. And so, with that, finish what you was talking about.
Well, they're so perfectly done that, you know, they either used a template or the same individual carved them, okay?
Yes.
And or they had very strict guidelines, who knows. But the thing that I started noticing when I when this light switch turned on was to first off go plot all the locations. And as I'm going through this assessment, evaluating the black book, I'm making notes and records of all the places where Jesse James supposedly had been. And I started marking those on my maps. Interestingly enough, every one of these mystery glyph sites so far to date, they are located not in an easy place to find. I mean, sometimes, yeah, they're, you know, like the one in St. George. But would it have been easily accessible back at the turn of the century? Probably not. But they're usually in a difficult place to get to. They're just not well pronounced like a billboard, okay? You're not going to be just driving down the trail, riding a horse down the trail and see the panel. They're always near a mining area, and there's always, with maybe one exception, a railroad nearby. And I got to one section in the book, the black book, that was talking about some of the operatives that worked with Jesse James, and one of them that he held in high regard were 2 Sioux Indians. And that's when I just, because in the book, Jesse James, referring to the many cache sites or depositories of the KGC, and I know this KGC story just sounds like some glorified thing from the Civil War, but
for those that don't know what the KGC is, just give us a real quick
Knights of the Golden Circle. A lot of people like to try and tie them in with the Masons, which understandably so, I can see why they do it. But they're 2 different organizations. They've tried to tie them in with Knights Templars. 2 different organizations, 2 different purposes. Jesse, assuming that it was Jesse, and you know, you can buy the book and read my findings on this assessment of the black book. But there was one place in there where he mentioned referring to all these depositories, and he said these depositories are all over the West. He didn't say a word about central states. He didn't say anything about in the East. He said these are all over the West. And I found a few more comments in there also. I wish I could remember the one. You can always cut the film and I can go find it, but he had someone ask him once about the signs and the symbols that they used, and he said something along the lines that they were all over the West, and they were asking him if he remembered them, and he said they're often mistaken for Indian writings. And I just everything I'm finding regarding these glyphs just keeps pointing back to the concept of code talkers. In the same way in World War I, World War II, they used code talkers. To me, this is just another form of code talking used in the Civil War. And it was created by these Sioux Indians and Jesse James. I'm quite sure that he knew how to use them and knew how to read them. But it's just where they're located, and the fact that you can place Jesse James in just about every location where these are. I mean, what else could they be?
So here's something I want to hit you up with, because I've had a lot of people hit me up and say, you know, you guys are off your rocker. Couldn't have been Jesse James. He was killed he was killed. They dug up his body and proved it with DNA and all that. And so you guys that think Jesse James lived on are full of it. What do you have to say about that?
And the Spanish blew up the Maine. What do I have to say about it?
Tell me about this DNA thing. Tell me about...
They remind me of the kind of people who would take an old map and go to the area that the map refers to, and they get there and they look around and they see all the trees and the many canyons and the big mountains, and they've probably already got it, and they go home just to justify themselves. You know, I know these stories are crazy, okay? I'm not saying I believe them. One of the reasons why I do what I do, and that is to take a mystery and delve into it and find out if there is a plausibility that it's a factual story. I don't know that you could actually prove it, but based on everything I found, Jesse James faked his own death and lived till 1951.
And so those people that say that they've dug him up, dig the DNA and proved that it was Jesse James in that grave, doesn't that put a nail in that coffin?
No. Have you seen the test results?
No, I've just heard people say.
Imagine that. Neither have I. And I can't seem to find anybody that's got them. But that's neither here nor there, okay? It's one thing to use something in an argument to diffuse what the other individual is trying to prove, but to use it and not have the substance to back it up.
I gotta agree with that. So if anybody out
there
has some of that proof, I want to see.
I'd love to see it.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay.
But what I think happened is, I think what they did is they used descendants of Charlie Bigelow, the man who was actually killed. And of course the DNA is going to match. We have no idea.
So
you know, you got people saying that, oh, they did DNA testing. Well, great. Where is it? I'd like to see it. I'd like to have an expert look at it.
So what do you mean they didn't use Jesse James' descendants? They used who's?
Well, if you're trying to find out if somebody's related to Jesse James, you might want to use somebody that's actually related to him. If they're going to dig it up and they're going to take DNA samples and it's Charlie Bigelow, who's it going to match? Is it going to match the the descendants of Jesse James, his actual descendants, or is it going to match the descendants of Charlie Bigelow, which came from the two children that were left behind after the murder? I mean, all I'm saying is, show me the evidence. I'd love to see it.
Valid point. Because there is a lot of hearsay here all over the internet. A lot of hearsay, and that's true. We need to get to the facts.
I would love to see it. If it exists and it was done the way it should be, I mean, what I would have done, and I don't know how you can find out now. I mean, we don't know that the person buried in this supposed, I mean, where is he buried? I can't find out. But if the person in that grave is the person that came from that little house in Missouri that was killed, regardless of whether it's Jesse or Charlie Bigelow, then whose DNA are you going to compare it to? I would have gone to documented descendants of Frank James, not documented descendants of the supposed Jesse James, such as Zerelda's children, because she was never Jesse James's wife, ever. And I don't think you'll ever find any DNA evidence that proves that she was, because they shared the same children. I mean, who are you going to go to for your DNA samples?
Yeah, I agree. You'd want to go for
I mean, we have a lot of possibilities of children from Jesse James, but let's be honest with ourselves. You've got to, you have to view it as a possibility. I'm not going to say it's a falsehood. I'm not going to say it's true. But if it is true, then we should be able to take the descendants and compare their DNA to known, documented descendants of Frank James. I've never seen the DNA results.
You make a good point.
It's a little sharp object on top of my head. So anyway.
So just as a side note, I have a guy who's contacted me. I'm going to be interviewing him shortly. He has the documented proof. He says that Jesse James was still alive, and we'll see what he comes up with.
I can't count how many times somebody has sent me an email telling me the same thing, and the photo, I hope he's not one of the tintypes, okay?
I don't think so.
Tintype photos?
I don't think so.
I've had so many people send me photos saying, oh, I've got documented proof. I'm sorry, but it isn't definitive, documented proof. In fact, the best that it gets is that they have a photo and they bought it off eBay or something, and because it's got some old timer, you know, back in the days of Jesse, it's got to be Jesse James. And I'm sorry, but they're not. And you know, some could argue that point with some of the evidences that I show in this assessment, because all it is an opinion. I admit it, okay? I know it's not definitive proof, but don't tell me I'm wrong. Prove me wrong. Show me I'm wrong. That's all I want. It's truth. I just want the truth. I'm trying to unravel the genealogical mess that has been created because of what Jesse James did his whole life. There's several stories of living descendants of Jesse James. I think a lot of the people don't even know it. As a matter of fact, if you were to delve into the in the book, we talk about the Hereford photos, okay? It has to do with Captain Harrison Trow. And I think if you got DNA samples from Harrison Trow's descendants, or even E.B. Black, which is Phineas Bushrod Black, who lived in Hereford, Texas, I think you would find, if you compared it to documented descendants of Frank James, you're going to find out that they're related. And if they are, then the story that Del Schrader told in the Black Book is likely true.
What about, and I know you didn't expect to talk about this, so man, I'm slamming you here. What about the evidences that they come up with that's saying that a person who we think Jesse James was could not have been because he was an alumni at a certain university and he's documented? What's your theories on that?
Okay. I'm usually pretty thorough when I come across a claim.
You are. That's why I'm asking you.
And I thought, well, this would be a pretty easy one to...
Tell us the college, if you remember, 'cause I don't remember, and the name.
Yeah, I thought that'd be pretty easy to check this one out, you know. They claim that it couldn't have been Jesse James. It was William A. Clark,
yeah.
Okay? So he said that he went to this university and blah, 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 and he migrated to Montana, and he had oxen that pulled his wagons and whatever, and I thought, you know what? If he actually went to school at that college, then they must have a record of him. And in fact, someone challenged me with that, you know, well, it couldn't have been him because he went to college at this particular college and whatever. And I said, really? I said, can you show me? Well, they stopped communicating with me. But what I did is I went to that particular college's website. And sure enough, they had this, you know, little section that they're very proud of. And And it said that, William A. Clark was an alumni, and he went to their college and so forth, and did a little ditty on him. And then right below it, it said source, wiki. Wiki? This is the college. Why don't you just put a picture of the documentation, his registration paper, something? Instead, they used wiki? So this is ridiculous. So I called him up. And I said, you guys seem to be pretty proud of the idea that William A. Clark attended your college. And they said, oh yeah, we're patting ourselves on the back, and yeah, we're all tickled about it. And I said, well, why did you list your source as wiki? Aren't you the college where he went? They said, well, yeah. And I said, well, you should have all of his registration records. Oh, well, that's all on microfiche. And I said, well, get a student to take a few minutes and go find those records. Prove that he went to that college. Oh, we don't have time for that. And I said, what if I paid someone to do it? Oh, we just don't have time to mess with that. They didn't want to do it. To this day, there is no proof he went to that college. None. So, if this college wants to do the time and dig into their own records and prove that William A. Clark went to their school at the time that it says that he did, then do it. I'd love to see it.
Okay. I like that.
The funny thing is every time I find one of his aliases or think that I have found an alias, William A. Clark, Harrison Trow, there's dozens of them. Every time I find one, I take them over to the genealogical research. And yeah, I'm third generation genealogist, so I can find my way around. There's always a lack of parents. And when a parent is listed, it's usually the one that went down in the academic records as to who his parent was, and then it fizzles out. Sometimes we actually get to a grandfather. But they're always dead ends. You can't follow them. And I think it's because the names are made up. Unless, of course, he's using somebody's name who was alive at the time. What's the guy's name that the Ford Motor Company? Henry Ford. He used his name at one time, so you'd be able to follow that one. I'm not making a statement of fact here. I'm just saying that.
Well, I just know that some people watching this are going to have these questions, and so I wanted to pin you down.
Let them have at it.
Because I know you are a researcher. You've come across them, and I wanted these guys to know you hit dead ends.
Well, just keep in mind, I am not saying definitively that was Jesse James. I personally believe it was. Okay, did you hear that word? I believe it was. Based on all the evidence I've looked at. And the evidence that I've looked at isn't what you're going to find in Wiki. That's what the book's about.
And so, back to my true love, the mystery glyphs. Somehow you believe that Jesse James, the KGC, left these marks for hiding Confederate treasure so that the South could rise again sometime in the future.
Yeah. And I think if the people knew the true history, and I'll use that word lightly, the true history, because, there's a lot of people out there that can come up with a lot of twists to the stories and excuses for this and excuses for that, and maybe I'm doing the same. I don't know. But my opinions, based on all the research that I've done, and I'm talking 30 plus years ago, when I was digging heavily into constitutional law and trying to understand what actually happened back in the Civil War days. Because I'm sorry, I just wasn't buying the story that, you know, all these people down in the South went to war, watched their women and children boarded up in churches and burned alive just because they wouldn't let their slave go. I'm sorry. Doesn't hold water for me. There had to be something more to it. And if you don't understand that, and you don't understand who Jesse James may have really been, and it wasn't just some rootin' tootin' cowboy who was going around shooting up everything and anything and robbing everybody he could think of. His primary targets were world bankers. If they were involved in a railroad, he was going to attack them. If they're in the banking business, he was going to go after them. It just depends on who it was. And I'm talking about the world bankers who instigated the Civil War. Did I answer your question? Or did I fashionably find a way to steer away from your mystery glyphs?
You a politician, Dan?
I hope not. I think they ought to take every politician and put them on trial.
What other interesting facts? Why do I want to read your book?
Why do you want to read it? I have no idea.
What's in there? Ken, give me a teaser.
The title is...
Well, you know,
Death of the Republic.
There were times. Well, you gotta have the want. You gotta want to know. If you don't want to know, don't buy the book. I don't care. Okay, I don't write books for money. There is no money in writing books. Okay, I'm telling you, none. You gotta want to know. The reason these books exist is because it's my own personal research, and I just simply found a way to share it with those who may be interested. Okay.
And so it deals with Jesse James.
Yes, it's an assessment. It's actually an assessment of two books. Okay, the first book is Jesse James was one of his names, nicknamed the Black Book. The other book is Utah Gold Rush. It's more specific to those people who live in Utah who have been told we'll call it a fascinating story that just happens not to be true. And I think I said this in a previous interview, but what got me on this particular topic is someone sent me a book. I'm still trying to remember who it was, and it was Jesse James was one of his names, the Black Book, and I said, would like you to assess the book. You know, you're good at figuring out puzzles and mysteries and finding the truth within things. Apply the same principles here. And I thought, you know what, I think I'd like to do that because, you know, even though never really dove into it, I'm kind of a Jesse James fan, okay? And I think it's because I had what I believe is a good understanding of the Civil War and what was actually taking place back then. So, anyway, but there was two things that it really came down to for me, and maybe three. One of them was in 1946 when J. Frank Dalton came out publicly and said, hey, I'm Jesse James. There was a ton of people that showed up, okay? There were tenfold more supporters than there were naysayers. But because the media generally establishes the history or what's going to be most commonly believed, the story kind of took over that, you know, J. Frank Dalton was a hoax, and you know, I don't care. But one particular individual is documented in photographic evidence. He's standing right there next to J. Frank Dalton on his deathbed. He knows damn well and good why he's there. He knows that J. Frank Dalton is claiming to be Jesse James, and he is historically documented as one of Jesse James's most loyal sidekicks, and that's John Trammell. So if J. Frank Dalton wasn't Jesse James, and John Trammell standing there right next to him, why isn't John Trammell saying, no, this isn't Jesse James? But he wasn't doing that, was he? Okay?
Point.
To me, that's what kept me going in the book. The other thing is here we have this book author, Del Schrader, who I think in a roundabout way was trying to push a little bit of his own agenda, in that I think it was a relative of his, a grandfather or something, knew Jesse James and whatever, and that's kind of what the second part of the book's about, is somebody who apparently their ancestor wasn't big enough for them, so they have to create a story. And I kind of think Dale might have interjected a lot of his own opinions, because he puts in the book a lot of those tintype photos, people that are not Jesse James. One of the most common mistakes I see on the internet is these people that are trying to compare photos to a picture of Frank James, not Jesse, but it doesn't matter because it's not Frank, it's not Jesse. How could Del Schrader be so accurate in so many of these claims in 1975 without the aid of the internet? And the claims in that book are numerous. And every time I pick one of those claims out of the book and go try to prove it, I either can't find anything or I find something that supports the possibility that it happened. And I have to ask myself, how could Del have possibly have received this information? Unless it was true. Unless he spent decades at the universities. And I don't think he did. The one that just blew me away was Harrison Troe. Captain Harrison Troe went down in history as the person who positively identified Jesse's body. Nobody ever questioned it. When I first started investigating this, I couldn't find any pictures of Harrison Troe. None. Because I thought, you know what, if the Black Book is correct and Jesse faked his death and showed up on the scene within 30 minutes dressed as Captain Harrison Troe, then I want to see a picture of Captain Harrison Troe, because I want to see if, number one, there was actually a Captain Harrison Troe. And eventually I found 3 photos. And one of the photos, my jaw just dropped open, because it could very easily be Jesse James's twin brother. They're that close. And I can't see how that's possible. Then the younger photo, compared to one of Jesse James's younger photos. I won't say it's as definitive as the previous mentioned one. And then there's the older photo, wherein Harrison Troe was at one of their reunions, but comparing that photo with J. Frank Dalton. The photos that you see of William A. Clark, I'm pretty sure that none of them are Jesse James. I think they are his double, the one that he mentions in the book, and I want to say his last name was O'Clark, and he lived in California. There's just too many differences, but he definitely looks an awful lot like Jesse James. And so, one of the things that really puzzled me, though, is in the Black Book, and I believe the academic world has the story pretty much the same way, but Harrison Troe showed up on the scene within 30 minutes. I mean, he got there before the police from the next town over. And from what I understand, it took about an hour for them to show up. Well, when he got there, and I believe the academics have it the same way, that he announced that he had been sent by Governor Crittenden. Well, if he had been sent by Governor Crittenden, who was 250 miles away, how did Governor Crittenden hear about the incident, dispatch a message to Captain Harrison Troe, and Captain Harrison Troe just happened to be close enough to be there within 30 minutes? It doesn't make sense.
To be an eyewitness to Jesse James being dead.
Yeah. Now, the biggest thing is what I call the Hereford photos. And, you know, you got to look at them and you got to decide for yourself. But I had someone contact me and they told me they saw photos of Captain Harrison Troe and his wife hanging on the wall at a museum down in Hereford. And it took me, I don't know, 6 to 9 months before I could actually get those photos. And finally, this little gal that works there found them, and turned out to be 2 photos. And she took a very nice photo of both of them and sent them up to me. And none to my surprise, there's Captain Harrison Troe, and he looks more like J. Frank Dalton at his particular age at the time, more so than he did Jesse's older photos. I mean, what I'm saying is I believe it was Jesse James. And then his wife was also in the photo. And I'm telling you, it looks just like Myra Bell, with about 40, 50 years put on her. But I would swear it's Myra Bell. Can I prove it? Oh, hell no. But I didn't expect to find some of the other people in the photo. A woman that I am very certain is Jesse James's mother, Molly Dalton, not Zerelda. What'd she go by? Zerelda Cole James? Okay, the Black Book says that was his aunt. All right. His father, Captain George S. James, the very same man who fired the first shots of the Civil War. And again, I can't prove it, but I'm telling you, that's who it is. Is in the photo also. And if I'm right, what the hell are they doing there? What's going on in Hereford, Texas? I think this is where the final days of the KGC operations had moved to. And there's a few other things that I'll keep to myself because, you know, even if I manage to prove it one way or the other, for the sake of those who are still living, you know, the general public doesn't need to know. I'd love to see the general public figure out those mystery glyphs.
I'm gonna shut this camera off, twist your arm, and have you tell me.
One of these days, I'm gonna have to send you a list. But I think you're gonna find out that the absolute base meaning of each of those little hieroglyphs,
Does it line up with the Ojibwa meanings? You think? Somewhat?
Yes, but it wouldn't surprise me if they used them randomly. In other words, they had a code where one day they meant this. And if you have this particular code, then they were shifted and they mean this. Because anybody can get hold of George Thompson's book. Not George Thompson.
George Tompkins.
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 What was his first name?
George Tompkins.
You sure it was? I don't think it is.
Something Tompkin.
Yeah, it's Tompkins' book. Anyway, any other questions?
I think that's it. You got any more you want to say?
Not really. I didn't want to say all that. That's why I write it down, so I don't have to say it.
Okay. Well, that said, then that's a wrap.